Hey, how we doing today? I want to do something a bit different. I want to take like the most boring topic in the world and hopefully make it more exciting. At least teach you something that you didn't know and kind of understanding. We're going to talk about estate planning and in particular wills. A will's an important document. Everybody should have a will. If you're over 18, have some sort of assets, you probably should have a will. If you're 12 years old, you don't need a will, obviously. If you don't have any assets, you really don't need a will because you don't have to worry about getting to anybody. But estate planning is one of those topics that we all talk about. It's important, and we rarely do anything about it because it's like this black hole that we're not really sure. It involves attorneys, and we don't like paying them because that's a black hole a lot of times of what we're going to pay them. And that makes it difficult. So we kind of put it off. Is if you're listening to this and you've even looked at your estate planning documents, if you have them in the last 5 years, I'd be surprised. If they've been updated in the last 10 years, I'd be surprised. It's just one of those things we push off. It's like changing the furnace filters. And truth be told, my first house was the same house I live in right now. It was the first time I had forced hot air, and I didn't know you had to replace the filter. And I blew up the furnace a year later. Year and a half? Yeah, never change the filter for a year and a half. Don't do that. Make sure you remember to do that. Same thing with estate planning. And if we don't do estate planning right, it can really cause problems. I had a couple of strange situations years ago. First one was this woman. It was actually a neighbor. It's a neighbor of a client. It was a neighbor of a client as well. And she was very concerned about if she got sick. Her 2-family house, she lived upstairs. Her son and daughter-in-law lived downstairs. If she got sick, they would take her house, and she didn't want them to take her house. So she put the house in the son's name. And that seems reasonable. Except then a couple of years later, the son got divorced. The ex-daughter-in-law was the one who got ownership of the house. And now suddenly it is no longer mom's house, and mom can be evicted. That's a serious estate planning mistake, is to make sure that you're covering those type of bases. I had another one about the same time, also a neighbor. And a client was relaying this to me, that they took care of their elderly neighbor at the time, next door neighbor. And for years, we're talking decades of time. And the old woman said, look, I'm leaving you my house because I haven't spoke to my daughter in 30 years. And I don't even know where she is. She's dead to me. We had this argument. She left. That's it. I don't know where to find her. This is 25 years ago. So not easy. It's easier today with the tools you have on the internet to hunt somebody down. Then it was a lot more difficult. And everything is fine. She does the will, and she does it improperly. And she passes away. And these neighbors who aren't looking for the house, they're not looking for the house really to on a Snidely Whiplash. Now we've got the house and we're all set. But it was theirs. They had done all of the work for 30 years to take care of this infirmed woman. And out of nowhere, the estranged daughter shows up. And because it was a poorly drafted will, she makes a claim against the estate. And eventually they wind up just paying her off. So doing wills wrong is bad. Doing bad estate planning can be bad. It doesn't always end in things like this, but it can cause real problems. So I want to talk about wills. And a will is a strange document. I'll give you the history lesson. This is really where we're gonna dive into some interesting, at least I think interesting history. Is our modern will, the way we interpret it today, begins in 1215. If you're a history buff, what's 1215, 1215, 1215? 1215 is the signing of the Magna Carta. Now, the Magna Carta was a fascinating document that the lords of England forced the king to sign. It is the precursor to our Declaration of Independence and Constitution. I was fortunate when my must have been second and fourth grade. Could have been third and first, but I'm pretty sure it was second and fourth. Anyways, the year before, my oldest daughter, Samantha, was in doing American history in grade school. And we're reading through the grade school-esque history book and talking about the Declaration of Independence. And this, as a dad, as a patriotic person, I love my country. She says, Dad, does the Declaration of Independence still exist? And I said, yeah. Can you see it? Yeah. And this was right before that Nicolas Cage movie where they steal a declaration. I'm going to steal a Declaration of Independence. Right before whatever it's called. I can't think of the name of the movie. And so off we go. That April vacation from school is she had a friend that had moved down to Maryland. So we decide we're going to get in the car. We're going to drive down. We're going to spend a couple of days in DC, visit her friend Izzy, who was awesome. She always made me laugh. And we went to the National Archive, the four of us. And there was the Declaration of Independence. There was the Constitution. And what most people ignored was on loan, I think it was on loan at the time, was one of the original copies of the Magna Carta, which spawned in some ways those other two documents. So Magna Carta, it's 1215. And I think it's King John at the time. They have laws and they have rules in England, except for one thing. The king is still the king. If you go back thousands of years, go back to ancient Egypt, that's the type of power that the king wields. And that was no different in 1200 England. And you go, no, it must have changed by then. It had not. It had not. So there are these rules, but the king could choose to not follow them if he chose to. It was, everything belonged technically to the king. It belonged to king and crown. And one of those things you don't think about when you see it, and I always see it, is whatever rendition of Robin Hood that you've seen in your life. So whether it was the Kate Blanchett, Russell Crowe one, which I never saw, I saw pieces of it. It was too dark looking. It was too, that whole genre of medieval type movies that have that coloration to them. I'm not a big fan of. There was the Alan Rickman as the Sheriff of Nottingham, 1980s one, with Kevin Costner. That's my personal favorite, just because I love Alan Rickman. He basically plays Hans Gruber as the Sheriff of Nottingham, which is awesome. You can go back to the Disney Fox one, the Errol Flynn one, early in the movie. Somebody, whether it's Will Moneypenny or whatever his name is, whomever it is caught poaching the king's deer. And you think, so what? Again, we live in America, so it's very different here. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Is the deer belong to the people here. The game of this country, the wildlife, everything, the open spaces belong to the people. Not so in Europe. In Europe, it belongs to the government. And that's still to this day, is you can't just go hunting in England. First of all, the population concentration of people is very high. The open areas are very limited, even if you go up to Scotland and things like that. But everything kind of belongs to the government. You need to get their permission to go hunting or things like that. So go back 800 years and you're looking at, whomever, this young boy poaches one of the king's deer because his family is starving. It belongs to the king and he didn't get permission. Permission meant you got to pay me in gold. The kid doesn't have gold. That's why his family is starving. If they had gold, they wouldn't be starving. It's that catch-22 that the poor are stuck in at the time. Everything belongs to the king. And the lords are fed up. There's a couple of things that I believe it's King John does, that he just ignores the laws. So they kind of like storm the castle a little bit and they force him to sign the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta says you will follow what's called the rule of law. Now, the first time I had ever heard of rule of law was during the Clinton impeachment, which is 30 years ago. I can't believe it's been 30 years. You look at Bill Clinton today and he's really old. So I guess it was. And I had never heard the term before. Basically that we're all going to adhere to these laws, that the rule is everybody has to follow. There's no exceptions. There's no exceptions. You have to follow these laws. And that's the simplest kind of definition of rule of law. We've had, depending on what side of the aisle you sit on, you could claim that a recent president has ignored the rule of law, or another recent president has ignored the rule of law and have just done whatever they wanted. And that really is true. It's hard. You have to be vigilant. I will tell you one of the biggest ignorers of rule of law, and this is going to come as a shock to a lot of people, is not number one, probably top three of ignoring rule of law as a president. Abe Lincoln. Is forget all of the slave stuff, because that was good. It was giving human rights is important, but the way he did it was not constitutionally sound. I understand what they did, but did you know he suspended during the Civil War habeas corpus, like suspended it? This is similar to FDR interning Japanese Americans during World War II. He basically, in the North, not just the South, in the North. So the northern states, President Lincoln would have American citizens of the northern states jailed for no reason, under a suspect of, we think they're cavorting with the South. That was it. That's not allowed under rule of law. So you go back to the time of the Magna Carta, is we're going to adhere to this rule of law. And like I said, that spawns the Declaration of Independence, and it spawns the Constitution, which, if you really look at them, they're very, very different from the Magna Carta, because obviously the Magna Carta is written for the lords and the king, because normal people didn't have any rights. They were still chattel. They were serfs. And very different from when you read through the text of the Declaration of Independence, especially in the Constitution to a great extent as well, is our sense of individual rights is at the time, 1700s England, less than 500 years later. It seems like it's a long time. It really is. But to change the entire mindset of the world is shocking. And it's a very American thing. And I'm going to explain, it's a very American thing. So when Christopher Columbus comes over and discovers the New World, and it's a question of, was he the first? He wasn't the first, and all of that. And the Pilgrims roll into Plymouth Rock, which, if you've ever seen Plymouth Rock, if you don't live in Massachusetts and you come to Massachusetts, you want to see Plymouth Rock, it's a rock under this big stone thing. That's it. That's the extent of it. You could take it, you can look at a picture and there it is. It's check the box of seeing it, but they show up. It's not even where they stopped, but I digress. So the Pilgrims show up and they start colonizing things. The rest of the world was very different than it is today on a culinary basis. So for instance, if I say, give me the main staple food of the Irish, potatoes. Yeah, potatoes didn't exist in the European continent until after 1492. That's an American thing. You look at a lot of Southeast Asian cultures and, hot peppers, spicy this, spicy that. It's American. You think Italian, and I'm going to tick off the Italians here. I'm okay with that. They claim they're cooking way more than they should. And tomatoes are an American thing. So prior to 1492, is Christopher Columbus himself an Italian? Allegedly. It's still a question of, was he Italian or was he Spanish or Portuguese? We'll assume he was Italian. He didn't have spaghetti sauce on his spaghetti. He didn't, because it didn't exist. It didn't exist until we brought back tomatoes from the New World. So there's a lot of things that happen. Sweet potatoes there's a myriad of foods that circled the globe that people consider the part of their culture. And I'm going to tell you that the sense of independent freedoms, that the individual has rights and freedoms, is an American thing. And what I mean by that is, so the settlers come over and they start colonizing, they start moving into the upstate New York area, Mohawk, I think Seneca. There was 5 tribes in the general area. And those tribes just absolutely baffled the Europeans, like baffled them, because these tribes, they had a chief. Chief wasn't 100% in charge. They had a council that met on an as-needed basis, and they weren't 100% in charge. Is people had an individual right. So if a member of the tribe just disagreed and said, I don't want to be here anymore, they could just leave. They could take off and leave and go do their own thing. And nobody thought worse of them for that. And they could come back later. But everything was very democratic. It had a very similar structure to what we look at in government today, especially if you look at if you look at a local city or town government. My gosh, it looks so much like how these Native Americans set this up hundreds of years ago. And it was baffling to the first settlers of, wait a second, aren't you beholden to that guy because he's in charge? And they'd look and go, he's not in charge of me. He's in charge of the tribe. And if I choose to be part of the tribe, I'll adhere to it, especially if the council agrees and okay. But if not, I don't have to do what he says just because I look like him. And that was very different. You look at the Magna Carta versus the Declaration of Independence, look versus the Constitution. The individual rights that are in there are uniquely American. So I always find that really cool, is the reason America has it. It's like imprinted in the DNA of the soil or something here. So I digress. And that's the last thing I think I'll digress on for your history lesson. This is kind of where I want to get you to understand all of this. Magna Carta is signed, and one of the things it gives is the lords were always owners of their own land, except before the rule of law, the king could just wipe them out, kick them off out of the manor, and put somebody else in. And he did do that at times. Now they can't. So truly, these lands belong to these lords. And the way lordship passes is from eldest son to eldest son to eldest son. At some point, 700 years ago, a lord says, I don't want my eldest son to get that. Maybe he doesn't trust him. Maybe there's some sort of medical issue that he's not going to live very long or whatever. And he wants to name somebody else, whether it's completely different or a different son or whatever. Now they have the right to do so. Okay, perfect. So let's assume the Snidely Whiplash, Alan Rickman's the son, the eldest son, bad guy. The Lord of the Manor decides, I'm going to write this down on a piece of paper, and I'm going to have it. And they write, I have sound mind and body, say that, my lordship will pass to my second son, Ralph. Perfect. Okay. Rolls it up, seals it, sets it down, passes away. Eldest son walks in, looks at it, lights the thing on fire in the nearest candle, and it's all over. He doesn't even have to at that point, but lights it on fire. It's gone. Poof. Everything follows based on the law. The lords think, that's not what I want. That's not really what I want. I want to make sure my wishes are carried out. How are we going to do this? Okay, I fill out this document. I write this all out. I roll it up. I seal it with my seal with the wax. And I send it to the court. I get my fastest rider to ride to the court and have the court hold onto it. Nobody can touch it. It's under locked key. It's under guard in the court. Perfect. When I pass away, then we can see what happens and nobody else can contest it. That's fantastic. So the Lord passes away. Everybody gets in their carriages. Off they go to the court, which is probably dozens, if not 100 miles away, because it's kind of spread out. And they sit down. The judge takes it, opens the seal in front of everyone, and reads the will. Very much like we see Hollywood. More in the golden age of Hollywood. You don't see it anymore. I think the last movie I saw with somebody opening a will and reading it was Four Brothers with Mark Wahlberg, which is a mediocre movie. But they do a reading of the will, which I find is hysterical, with the attorney, not a judge. But they would read the will and everybody would know. And it's a very public process. People could bring grievances, could bring claims against the estate, all of that. And the court then settles that estate. Wow. What if I told you that process is not that much changed 700 years later? It just isn't. It was a very efficient process in 1300 England because you weren't in a rush. You were not in a rush at all. You were in a concern to make sure everything was done properly. That was the most important thing. So sending it to the court right away and having the court read everything. It might take months for everybody to get there, and then read out the will and then divide things as necessary, hear any grievances, all of that. Somewhat time-consuming process, not a big deal. It's 2025. We still have the same process with not a whole lot of differences. So let's talk about what a will does today, and then we're going to wrap up. And that's it for today. The will is drafted by you, and it's drafted. They're long. If you have one, you look and you go, why is it so long? Why is this will so long? Well, again, who's going to read the will? The court's going to read the will. Wills go to court. People think, oh, I don't have to go to probate because I have a will. No, you are going to probate because you have a will. And if you don't have a will, you're definitely going to probate. But wills go to probate. Wills go to the court to be read. Because of that, we want to make sure there's certain language that is written a certain way, and that sometimes is state dependent. So you want to be aware of that. But over the course of 200 years of legal precedent and challenges and court cases, certain phrases mean certain things to the court. They may mean nothing to us. You go, man, that was like 58 words to say 3 words. Why do they do that? Because of these previous court cases. And now you look at a typical will today, what I see done by a qualified estate planning attorney might be 6 to 10 pages long with not a lot of complication in terms of how we're distributing the assets, 6 to 10 pages, because you want to make sure that the court can read through that and know exactly what you're saying. So you draft the will and you don't give it to the court. You hold on to it now. Now we hold on to the will. We don't give it to the court until after the person passes away. What used to be called the executor now is called personal representative. I love executor and executrix. That's such a great title. We're now personal representative. It's like, yeah, they're not a person anymore. So not really a person's representative because they have passed, but that's what they call it. And then you bring it to the court. You register it with the court. You get what's called a court appointment. Is you're not instantly the executor or personal representative. The court has to appoint you. So they review your will, review the person's will, and appoint you as that. And then you can start the process of moving assets. Then you have to give an accounting of what you did to the court. They can make sure during that time, anybody can come in and read your will. So once the court is in possession of your will, and it's got to be posted. It used to be posted in the newspaper. I'm not even sure how they post it these days. Remember, it used to be you'd open the back of the newspaper, local newspaper, and they'd have, the legal notices. You'd post that there so that if anybody had a claim, they were notified to people to go to the court and make a claim. Anybody can make a claim. Anybody can make a claim. Anybody. So if you pass away, I can make a claim. Is it valid? Doesn't matter. I can make one. I might get paid off. That's the problem with a very public process. And we'll talk at a future date about how to solve that problem. But you're in a situation where it's very public. It's wide open. And here's what it entails is there are only certain assets that will go to probate. So for instance, let's say I get a meteor comes through my office and wipes me out right now. What about my house? Where's my house going? My house is owned jointly with my wife. My wife's getting my house because it knows where to go. She doesn't need to go to probate. She's all set. Same meteor comes down. I've got my 401k at work. She's the beneficiary there. Wait a second. Did she send the meteor? Got to worry about that. My 401k is a beneficiary. It goes back to my wife again. No need for probate. What's necessary is if you have assets that are just in your name only, that don't know where to go. If you think about it, is if you passed away and your all of your assets had legs and knew where, and any asset that knows where it's going can go there. It will go there without probate. Anything left over must go through probate. So for a married couple, I'll give you a great example of where you're going to bump into probate. Again, that house again. One of you passes away. House goes to the survivor. Piece of cake. What happens when the survivor passes away? Oh, now I need the will. Now it's going through probate. So we need to be aware of that. And there are things we can do to mitigate that process. Maybe or maybe not important for you. It really depends on your situation. I know some lawyers say, first of all, everybody should have what's called a living trust, and we won't get into that today. I'm not convinced everybody. I'm probably convinced a good number of people, less so than I used to be. I was probably more of a true believer 10 or 15 years ago than I am today. I don't think the lawyers are doing it because is doing a typical estate plan and doing a typical estate plan with a living trust will about double the cost, give or take. I don't think the lawyers are doing it to try to get more money now. They'll actually get more money later if they don't recommend it. So it's in their best interest not to. I just think it's somewhat automatic with some attorneys. Other attorneys, it's automatic to say, no, don't do that. Don't complicate it. So it really depends. It's important for you to get good estate planning advice. It's vital. Please don't go online and download a will and pay $29. Pretty please. You need a qualified estate planning attorney. You really do. It's something we work with our clients very heavily. Is when we bring a client through the financial planning process, the first thing we do is with the estate planning part is kind of figure out what they want to do with their money and really get detailed with that before we sit down with the attorney. I want that locked up. I want the client to know exactly what they're looking for, because an attorney knows all these funny legal words and they can kind of steer them incorrectly. We don't want that to happen. So it's an integral part of the planning we do is to make sure that the estate planning is drafted correctly, and then sitting down with the attorney and drafting it. And then on a regular basis, reviewing that estate plan to make sure that it is still valid. So that's what I've got for you today. Like I said, a little bit weird, a little bit educational. Hopefully you enjoyed the education. I always love education like that, of finding out all that background stuff of what's going on. If you have questions, jump down to the show notes. Just give me a shout out either through social media or our website. If you have ideas for the show, that'd be great as well. If you get a chance, please rate us on your favorite podcast app. Rate us 5 stars if you can. And that's it. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to Your Successful Retirement with your host, Dennis O'Keefe. Please click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. You can find information for Dennis, our guests, or resources mentioned in today's episode in the show notes.